There is a road in the Sierra Nevada that doesn't lead anywhere most people would ever want to go. It climbs through forest and shadow, past the snow line, past the point where the asphalt gives way to frozen dirt. It winds higher and higher into the darkness of the California mountains until it simply ends, stopped by winter, by wilderness, by the kind of silence that has weight to it. On the night of February 24, 1978, a car drove up that road, a 1969 Mercury Montego, dark-colored, carrying 5 young men from Yuba City who had no reason to be there. No map leads you to that road by accident. No shortcut ends there. The men inside had never been to that part of the mountains before. One of them had never even been up in the mountains at all. The car was found the next morning, sitting just below the snow line. Engine cold. Doors unlocked. One window rolled down. A quarter tank of gas still in it. The keys were gone. The men were gone. What happened between the moment they left a convenience store in Chico, California, sometime before 10 o'clock that night, and the moment that car sat abandoned and silent in the snow, has never been fully explained. 5 men drove into those mountains. The wilderness gave back 4 of them, eventually, but by then it was far too late, and the 5th has never been found at all. They were called the Boys by nearly everyone who knew them. That word, boys, carries something in it. Warmth, protectiveness, the way a community wraps itself around people it loves. Ted Weiher, Jack Madruga, Gary Mathias, Bill Sterling, and Jackie Hewitt ranged in age from 24 to 32. They lived at home with their families in the flatlands of Yuba City and nearby Marysville, in the northern reaches of California's Central Valley. They were not children, but they were, in many ways, protected, and they had built their lives inside a world of close routine, familiar faces, and the kind of trust that comes with being deeply known by the people around you. They had bonded at the Yuba City Vocational Rehabilitation Center, where they played basketball for the Gateway Gators. Basketball was not just a pastime. It was the center of their social world. They practiced together. They traveled together. They were scheduled, the very morning after that February night, to compete in a Special Olympics tournament in Sacramento. A tournament they had spent weeks preparing for. A tournament that represented something real and earned. The winners would receive a week-long vacation in Los Angeles with all expenses paid. Their uniforms, according to their families, were already laid out on their beds back home. Ted Weiher was 32, the oldest of the group, heavy-set and gentle, the kind of man who greeted strangers on the street with a wide, unguarded smile. He lived with his parents and had a reputation for being kind to everyone he met. Jack Madruga, Doc, they called him, was 30 and owned the Mercury. He was proud of that car. His parents later said he had never liked the cold, had never been up into the mountains. He was, by their account, deeply attached to his routine and to the safe geography of his daily life. Gary Mathias was 25, the youngest, and in some ways the most capable among them. He had served in the army. He had been diagnosed with schizophrenia and given a psychiatric discharge, but by 1978 he was being treated on an outpatient basis and was considered by his physicians to be one of their success cases. His doctors reported his symptoms had not resurfaced in 2 years. He supplemented his disability pay by working in his stepfather's gardening business. Bill Sterling was 29, quiet and studious. He spent his days at the local library, reading about religion. Jackie Hewitt was 24, the youngest and perhaps the shyest of the group, a man who reportedly grew anxious around phone calls, who let his brothers handle those for him. Together, they made something complete. What one lacked, another had, and they had plans for Saturday morning. On Friday evening, February 24th, they made a last-minute decision. UC Davis was playing Chico State at California State University. Chico, 50 miles north of Marysville. They were fans. They hopped into Jack's Mercury at around 5:40 in the evening and drove up through the flat Sacramento Valley toward Chico. The night was cold but clear. The road between Marysville and Chico runs through low farmland. No elevation, no drama. A straight drive through the valley. About an hour. They watched the game. They cheered. They were last spotted at Bears Market after the game, where they bought one Hostess cherry pie, one Langendorf lemon pie, one Snickers bar, one Marathon bar, 2 Pepsis and a quart and a half of milk. The store clerk would later tell investigators she had been annoyed by them. They came in right before closing time. They left heading south, in the direction of Yuba City. That was the last confirmed sighting of any of them alive. In the early morning of Saturday, Bill's mother woke at 2 a.m., checked her son's bedroom, and found it empty. She called Jackie's mother, who answered immediately. Her son wasn't home either. By morning, it was confirmed. None of the 5 men had come home. None had called. The Gateway Gators tournament was beginning without them. Their families contacted the police. The search began immediately, focused, initially, on the valley route between Chico and Marysville, the road any reasonable driver would have taken. Officers searched it. Found nothing. No accidents. No tire marks off the road. No sign they had passed through at all. A few days later, a Plumas National Forest ranger reported that he had seen a Mercury parked along the Oroville-Quincy Road on February 25th, a remote mountain road running high into the Sierra Nevada, in the opposite direction of Yuba City. At the time, he hadn't thought much of it. People drove up that road on winter weekends for cross-country skiing. After reading the missing persons bulletin, he recognized the car and led deputies to it on February 28th. What they found made no immediate sense. The car sat on the mountain road with the driver's window rolled down. There was nothing wrong with it. Police hot-wired it easily. It had a quarter tank of gas. Inside, candy wrappers, milk cartons, a newspaper, and basketball programs with scoring statistics. Maps were still in the glove compartment. The wrappers from Bears Market, the pie, the candy bar, the Pepsi. Evidence that the men had been in that car between Chico and wherever this road had taken them. The car's location was 70 miles from Chico, far from any direct route to Yuba City or Marysville. None of the men's families could speculate as to why they would drive up a long winding dirt road on a winter night into a high-elevation remote forest without extra clothing. The road sat at 4,400 feet of elevation, near the snow line. A short distance further on, it was closed for winter entirely. The snow was not very deep. Police noted that 5 healthy, athletic men could easily have pushed the car free. They did not. The Yuba County undersheriff later told reporters the scene was, in his words, bizarre as hell. The mountains closed in quickly after that. A severe blizzard moved through the area within days of the car being found, dumping 9 inches of new snow across the upper elevations. Forest rangers searched the area for 5 days and found no trace of the men. 2 days later, the search teams nearly lost men themselves as their snowcats struggled through the drifts. The wilderness was not passive. It was actively hostile. Jackie Hewitt's father joined the search parties. He rode snowmobiles through the forest with their dog Bo, calling out. The snow absorbed sound. The trees gave nothing back. One witness emerged from the chaos of those early days. A 55-year-old man named Joseph Shons came forward after hearing about the disappearances in the press. He said he had been on that same mountain road on the night of February 24th, driving up toward a lodge he owned to check skiing conditions. His car had gotten stuck in a snowdrift. While trying to push it free, He had experienced what he believed were the early signs of a heart attack. He returned to his car and sat in the cold. He reported seeing headlights at a distance, hearing whistling and voices, and glimpsing a small group that included a woman carrying what he took to be a baby. He said that when he called out for help, the lights went off and the group went quiet. Sean's account became one of the most discussed pieces of evidence in the entire case. It also became one of the most contested. Across later tellings and media references, certain details varied. The presence of the woman and baby appeared in one version and not in another. The number of people shifted. The position of the vehicles and the timing of the lights changed. He later admitted, speaking about one particular detail, that he had been, in his own words, half-conscious, not lucid, hallucinating, and in deep pain. Whether he saw what he described, or whether pain and cold and fear constructed a scene out of shadows, remains unanswerable. What is known? Sean's walked 8 miles down the mountain the following morning to find help. He passed Madruga's car on the way. By then, the men were already somewhere in the forest, already walking, already cold. The search was eventually suspended. The snow was too deep. The mountain had won. Investigators decided to wait for spring. The snow melted slowly through April and May. The forest that had swallowed 5 men over a single winter night began, very gradually, to give up what it had taken. On June 4, 1978, motorcyclists exploring the trails of Plumas National Forest came across a Forest Service trailer in the woods, 20 miles from where Madruga's car had been discovered. 20 miles. Through mountain wilderness, in winter clothing inadequate for the temperature, without food, without fire. 20 miles. The motorcyclists noticed a broken front window. They opened the door. The body of Ted Weiher was stretched out on a bed, wrapped in sheets. His feet were severely frostbitten. His body was emaciated, and the length of his beard suggested he had been alive for 2 to 3 months after disappearing. A pathologist would later construct a more precise timeline from that beard growth. Ted Weiher, the oldest and gentlest of the 5, had survived in that trailer for an estimated 8 to 13 weeks. He had lain there, alone, as winter deepened and then slowly gave way to spring. He had died, investigators concluded, just 2 weeks before the motorcyclists found him. 2 weeks. What made this discovery devastating in a way that went beyond simple tragedy was what else was found inside that trailer. An outdoor locker contained 31 cans of rations, canned ham and crackers, that had been opened and partially consumed using a military P-38 can opener, likely carried by one of the men with Army experience. Some food had been used, but another adjacent locker held additional canned goods, untouched, enough to feed all 5 men for more than a year. There was also a shed nearby with matches, fuel, and a propane tank, all of which went untouched. The trailer had a heating system, a propane stove that needed only to be turned on. It was never activated. Matches were present, paperback books, wooden furniture, everything needed to start a fire. No evidence of any fire was found. No heat had ever been generated in that trailer through the entire winter. Ted Weiher had lain in that bed, wrapped in sheets in freezing temperatures, with survival tools within arm's reach, and had not used them. His shoes were missing. The shoes found in the trailer belonged to someone else, Gary Mathias. Evidence suggested Mathias had been in that trailer at some point, had removed his shoes and left Weiher's behind, and then had walked back out into the mountain. Gary Mathias was never found. The following week, search and rescue teams located the partial remains of Madruga, Sterling, and Hewitt 2 miles from the trailer. They had clearly been picked apart by animals. The keys to the Mercury were found in Jack Madruga's pocket. He had carried them all the way up the mountain and through the forest. The car that could have saved them had sat operational and waiting, miles below, while the man who owned it walked further into the cold with the keys in his pocket. Investigators spent weeks, then months, attempting to understand the sequence of decisions that had ended here. The case accumulated theories the way abandoned places accumulate silence, slowly, inevitably, never quite filling the emptiness. The most credible reconstruction, supported by investigators and later by forensic analysts, begins with a wrong turn. Not negligence, not intention. A wrong turn in the dark, possibly in fog or low visibility, onto the Oroville-Quincy road that climbed away from the valley route. The men, unfamiliar with the road, may have kept driving, perhaps because darkness made it impossible to recognize how far wrong they had gone. When the car stopped at the snowline, they faced a decision no one who knew them could explain. They left the car and walked upward, into the mountain, rather than back down toward the valley road. The behavior described as baffling, leaving a warm car, not using survival resources, not lighting a fire, follows directly from what is documented about each man's cognitive profile and from the well-established physiological progression of hypothermia, which impairs judgment before it kills. Cold does not announce itself as danger. It arrives as confusion, as the strange certainty that walking forward makes more sense than staying still, as the inability to recognize a propane stove as something that could save your life. One theory about how they found the trailer at all involves a snowcat. On Thursday, February 23rd, the day before the game, a snowcat had been sent to clean the trailer. It's plausible the men saw the tracks in the snow and followed them, believing they might lead to shelter. They couldn't have known the shelter was 20 miles away. Two of them, Sterling and Madruga, and possibly Hewitt, may have died during that walk before ever reaching it. What Gary Mathias did remains the one truly unresolved thread in all of this. He was the most capable among them, the Army veteran, the man whose doctors called him a success story. His shoes left inside the trailer suggest he was there, that he had seen Wyher lying in that bed, had perhaps tried to help, had taken footwear more suitable for travel in the snow, and then had walked back out into the wilderness. An internal Yuba County Sheriff's Office memo from October 2020 stated that Gary Mathias is believed to be a victim of foul play, and that the case remains open as a missing person and homicide investigation. No new physical evidence accompanied that memo. No suspect has ever been named. The note existed, circulated internally, and did not reach his family for years. Whether Mathias walked out of those mountains on his own, whether he encountered someone in that wilderness, whether he died somewhere the search teams never thought to look, these questions have no answers. His body has not been found. The families of the Yuba County Five have carried something that does not have a clean name. Grief is part of it. But grief, at its most uncomplicated, comes with understanding, with knowing what happened, even when what happened is devastating. What the families of Ted Wyher, Jack Madruga, Bill Sterling, Jackie Hewitt, and Gary Mathias were left with was something worse than grief. It was grief without resolution, loss without explanation. Sterling's sister Debbie spoke, years later, about her brother. "Someone made them go up that road," she said. "Bill didn't like the snow." Her certainty that there must be an explanation outside of simple confusion and wrong turns and the terrible physics of hypothermia is deeply human. It is the mind's refusal to accept that people it loved could be lost to something as impersonal and indifferent as a cold mountain and a series of small, compounding failures of judgment. Madruga's family struggled to accept that the man who had never been up in the mountains, who hated cold weather, who was proud of his car and his route and his routines, had simply driven up a remote mountain road in February without explanation. His niece, in the days after the disappearance, had gone into the mountains herself looking for them, traveling with her brother down roads she didn't know, past men with shotguns, following rumors. The search was personal in a way official investigations cannot replicate. Mathias's family has lived with the worst of it. Not a body, not a grave, not a definitive answer. A 2020 memo that said homicide, that said his case remains open, that suggested the sheriff's office believed someone had done something to their son and had said nothing for decades. There are things about the Yuba County Five that cannot be explained even now, nearly 50 years later, and they sit in the mind in a particular way. Not as supernatural mysteries, but as reminders of how quickly the familiar can dissolve. 5 men left a convenience store in Chico on a cold Friday night in February with snacks for the drive home, basketball programs tucked under their arms, tournament uniforms waiting for them back in Marysville. They had a game in the morning. They had things to look forward to. Somewhere between that parking lot and the snow line of the Sierra Nevada, something changed. A turn was taken. A decision was made. Or a decision was made for them. By someone, or by the particular, impersonal cruelty of darkness and confusion and cold. Ted Weiher lay in that trailer for weeks, possibly months, close to food he couldn't bring himself to eat, beside a stove he couldn't bring himself to light. The mystery isn't only why he ended up there. It's what was happening inside him in those weeks of silence and cold and waiting. What he understood. What he didn't. Whether he expected, in any part of himself, that someone would come. Nobody came in time. The mountains held the secret through an entire winter. The snow covered everything. The car, the tracks, whatever happened on that road. And when it finally melted, what it returned was not answers. It was the evidence of how long a person can endure, and how alone they can be at the end, and how little the wilderness owes us in the way of explanation. Gary Mathias walked out into the snow and was never seen again. There are roads that don't lead anywhere people were meant to go, and sometimes, inexplicably, impossibly, people drive up them anyway, and the mountain keeps what it takes.